You're listening to Biz-Souls, the business podcast with an edge, hosted by me, Rona Lewis, and Jeffrey Hansler. Tune in for perspectives and discoveries about the changing world of business. It's time to connect to the heart, soul, and humor of how business gets done. Hi, Jeffrey.
Hi, Rona.
How are you?
Hey, we have our first guest today, don't we?
We do. And first, people should probably know where we are and who we are. I am Rona Lewis.
I'm Jeffrey Hansler.
And this is Biz-Souls, the fantastic business podcast where
we get to the heart and soul of business and the people that make it happen.
Yes, and we're actually doing a special podcast today on Roe versus Wade because I am, let's just say miffed is not even close to the way I am feeling about it. And I know a lot of people have all different opinions. And we have an incredibly special guest who we will introduce in a moment.
Okay.
Yeah? Okay.
Well, let's get on with it.
Okay. So here's the deal. On January 22nd, 1973, the Supreme Court issued a 7-2 decision in favor of Jane Roe, who was Norma McCorvey. Is that it? McCorvey.
Right.
Holding that women in the United States had a fundamental right to choose whether to have abortions without excessive government restriction and striking down Texas's abortion ban as unconstitutional.
Well, and I'd heard it wasn't really about abortion, although that was the underlying issue. It was more about privacy.
Yeah.
So that's part of what.
That's what we heard. We will find out if that's in a second. And more recently, at the beginning of May 2022, a leaked version opinion from Samuel Alito, which has been confirmed as authentic, indicates that Roe versus Wade decision will be overturned. And overall, because this is a business podcast, it's all about people.
Correct.
It's our
all
most
about people.
Valuable resource. And they're also the key to innovation and a competitive edge, and advances in medicine, social norms, and technology bring a lot of tough decisions to the forefront of society and business. And never have so many people been able to share their thoughts with the world. And that's kind of what we're doing, and so there's a lot of power in the media now to affect decisions of all kinds, including medical outcomes. Before we go on, I do want to mention real quick, this podcast does represent a healthy discussion, or we would like to represent that for any important
talk
issues.
about these things.
Right. And I don't care what side of the line you fall in. This is a safe space for discussion of different ideas and different perspectives. And if you have one, please do let us know.
Well, wait a second. We had like 6 people signed up as
our
guests. This is going to be our guest breakout. And we had a couple of lawyers, additional lawyers, and then we had some business people here.
Yeah.
And all of them except Thane said, I don't want to be part of that. And they were
all scared.
They were frightened. You could hear the fear. They were doing distractions and deflections, like you should talk about this or talk about this. This is such a heavy issue for them. They wouldn't, and that's horrible. We're trying to create a safe environment for discussion, and they're afraid to even have the discussion.
Yeah, we had a couple of people say, "Oh, it's not good for my job, and these were lawyers saying, I'm really doing well, and it's like, I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm asking for the law,
right?
It's black and white. Anyway, so
which brings us to Thane.
Yes, we are lucky to have Thane Rosenbaum with us, who has not only been my friend for over years. He is an amazing individual. He's an American novelist, essayist, and distinguished university professor at Touro College, and he's also the director of the Forum on Life, Culture, and Society there. He is a legal analyst for CBS News and a myriad of others. And Thane, you're on TV like every day. on cable and broadcast, and I'm sure radio and other forms. And I am honored and so appreciative that you're willing to join us here.
Because everybody knows about Biz-Souls, and we're so popular.
We're so popular. We are getting more.
Are you
more
kidding?
listeners.
When I told my agent that I was on Biz-Souls, she just said, "Run, get over there. Here's a tie. Put on a tie. Look good. You're on Biz-Souls."
It's not even a clip-on. That's so impressive.
Yeah, no, I went all out here. It is true that I've known Rona Lewis for a long time, and I've only known Richard more recently. Jeffrey, sorry.
Jeffrey.
More recently.
He knows who he is.
But I will say that from that intro, very charming hosts. So really very charming. Very.
I'll send you your $1 a little later on.
Why wouldn't someone want to be on this show?
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're thinking.
That's what that's what no one else may believe it, but we like it.
So can I start off?
Please do.
So Thane, so I told you we had a bunch of people on this they had said yes initially they do it, and then they all backed out. So my first question to you is, why are people that are normally willing to discuss anything, why would they be afraid to talk about this issue?
Well, the cancellation culture spreads wide and deep in the broader culture. It isn't a joke. I mean, welcome to my world, Jeffrey. A free-thinking, non-agenda-driven public intellectual is a dead man in our culture. Mm-hmm. The only thing that's acceptable is a very, very, very extreme, fringe, emotionally hysterical, shouting down the other side opinion. Yeah. And that's the only thing that's tolerated on CNN and MSNBC and even Fox and Newsmax, which, I used to be much more engaged with MSNBC and CNN. They're never going to call me again, mm-hmm. because I don't have an agenda. And I speak to the left and the right. I'm usually just an analyst. I don't provide, a political view. And you're simply not, you see this on social media where, people are banished morally. To be called a racist in this culture is like, just breathing air. Everyone is. So I'm called, Rona says, I'm on TV every day. That's probably true, but I'm called a racist more than once a day, because if you don't say exactly what the other side wants you to say, or a Trumper, or a racist, or a Trumper, or, you're some lunatic, Hillary Clinton supporter, whatever it is. So we're living in a time where people get disinvited from Shabbat dinners, where parents say you can't go play with so-and-so because those parents are crazy. You've got an enormous amount of conflict within schools about what can be taught and what shouldn't be taught. You have a lot of what I call moral narcissism, which is this impulse to say, look at me, I'm white and Jewish and I hate Israel. Look at me, I'm white and Jewish and I'm the first one in line for Black Lives Matter. Right. Look at me, as if to say, this makes me virtuous. Mm-hmm. This sets me apart as a really, really virtuous, good person. People do this all the time. They're even doing it unconsciously. Right. And that's why they invoke the words racism so quickly. And everyone is afraid to say the wrong thing, because the wrong thing completely violates what today, the concept of open inquiry and open minds doesn't exist. Yeah. And so the people that you invited figured it's not worth it. Life is short. I could say one thing that will be clipped and put on TikTok or sent to my clients. I have written about people that have been fired for opening one of those accounts that conservatives are on. For opening an account. There was an essay that I wrote.
Trump on Trump's new thing?
Not Trump's, the ones that were preceded Trump's. I wrote about a literary agent who was fired by her agency for opening up an account that she never posted anything on yet. And the agency wrote, it's one of my essays for the Jewish Journal. Okay. She wrote this, the agency had wrote this incredible apology. This is not who we are. We took care of this immediately. I'm saying, took care of what?
Yeah.
The person opened an account. So yes, that's if people are being banned from Twitter, if people's accounts are being suspended on Facebook, people are being put on suspension, which happens all the time in universities, in the corporate world. People are put on suspension all the time, where HR has to do an investigation and where very strong letters of reprimand are put in your file. So yes, I'm not surprised to hear you have that experience.
Yeah, I just find that fear is just so pervasive in our society anymore. You can't say anything, even with the Black Lives Matter and Me Too, just for anything. And no one has a sense of humor anymore, or you have to be so careful about your humor. It's here in Los Angeles, being a New Yorker, our wit is a little more sarcastic, and you have to check that because people just are so taken aback or just are so touchy. So anyway.
Well, the thing is, the concept morally beyond the pale is really the term of art. That if you don't agree with me, it's not that you're wrong, or that it's simply you're morally beyond the pale. That is new. That is new to our culture, that people actually think that, instead of saying, when's the last time someone said to you, I say this all over the country, when's the last time someone said to you, what, I hadn't really thought of it that way before. I don't know if I agree with it, but I'm going to sit with it for a few days, maybe a week. I might get back to you. I doubt that I'll change my mind, but I appreciate that perspective. A person like that would be stoned for even saying what I just said. Would be stoned, saying, what do you mean you don't have an immediate, reflexive, automatic condemnation? Automatic. The fact that you weren't automatically condemning what that person said means you're worse than he is. Worse than he is. Your parents are worse than you are. This is what people do, and it's socially acceptable.
Yeah, which is scary. Okay, so thank you for that. And neither Jeffrey and I, what you want to say?
No, I was just gonna say, we usually go off tangent on stuff. We need to
we
stay
do.
focused
I know.
on
Sorry,
this.
that was my
while
fault.
You're talking and thinking, okay, it used to be the silent majority. Now has the silent majority become the new guys that are on the mic, the people that are on mic, and
it's a good point.
Shooting out. I don't know what's going on. So we have to stay on track.
I know we digress a lot. So sorry about that.
That's what three friends do.
That's true. That's right. That's right. Okay, now Jeffrey and I are not lawyers. Although Jeffrey's reading, what book are you reading on
Trackman's? What is it? No, you're.
It's anyway.
Tools of Argument.
Tools of Argument. So all of a sudden he's getting very lawyer-like. So and to that point, I since I am not a lawyer or anything close, could you help me and other people just share with us the exact legal ruling in the Roe versus Wade case? Like, what exactly is it saying, since we actually mentioned that?
Yeah, in layman terms.
Yeah.
In layman terms.
Yeah, simple. Like you're talking to a 5-year-old.
The good news is I'm often paid simply to explain things to the general public.
Thank you.
I may be a law professor, but all the other law professors think I'm a joke, because I actually talk to people.
Thank you. That's very
Actual
good.
regular people. I do not write scholarly books. I write books for people. And that's something academics don't do.
And I've read a lot of them. They're very
they don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Academics like to talk to each other and not to people.
Well, they like to be the smartest person in the room.
Right. So in the simplest, bare bonus explanation is that when James Madison and Alexander Hamilton were writing the Constitution, preambles, articles, amendments, they set forth a number of constitutional rights that were really all related to the way King George III messed with our minds. The Constitution, if you look at it, you go, oh, I see. Speech, assembly, press, religion. Oh, soldiers can't come into your house and start looking through your closets. Oh, I see. It was the stuff that the king did to the colonists that drove them insane, We were like a traumatized people, from this king. So the articles, even the Articles of Confederation, before there was a constitution, and then there was the Constitution, all of that was written in mind. What can we do to prevent another King George III? So as you can imagine, in the 18th century, no one said, oh, and make sure abortion is legal. Like that, never occurred to James Madison. That was not something that was anywhere being done. Medicine was, in the Dark Ages. It wasn't considered anything. It would be absurd to talk about it. So this is what the conservatives have said for years, which is, show me in the Constitution where abortion is a right. Show me where it says, freedom of press, religion, speech, assembly, right to be free from cruel and unusual punishments, right to due process of law, right to confront your witnesses, the way the interpretation of the various constitutional amendments have been interpreted by the Supreme Court. So that's really still the fight, because it doesn't say anything about abortion. Now, what happened in the 1960s, the word mythology is not the right word, but in the 1960s, Supreme Court started to come up with what was then called, not then, but was applied, substantive due process, which means not procedural due process, but things that the court can say is a right you have that the government can't take away from you, even if it's unenumerated. Even if it's not in there, it's still a right that you have as a human being, right? And so that's where we started to see contraception, Griswold versus Connecticut, where all of a sudden the Supreme Court said, you have a constitutional right to contraception. Now, the conservatives said, where the hell did James Madison say contraception? He didn't even know what that was. They didn't have rubbers. So where did you come up with this stuff, right? And this has been driving conservatives insane since the 1960s. And there was a run-up of cases that were all emanating out of what became, as Jeffrey said earlier, the right to privacy. It doesn't say the right to privacy, but there was this understanding that if you look at the 14th Amendment and the 5th Amendment and you make a left in Wyoming, it's like a map. If you take a few of the amendments, and they use the word penumbras, if you hear the word penumbra, it means the shadows, right? The shadings. So it was an interesting use of the term, saying, well, in the shadings of the 14th and the 9th and the 5th, you have something called the right to privacy, right? Which is a broader right. Again, it doesn't say there's a right to privacy, but in that category of the right to privacy, we have seen contraceptions, right to marriage, abortion, right to same-sex intimacy, Texas versus Lawrence, that's out of Texas, the right to have homosexual relationships, the right to marry a person of the same sex. That line of cases are all what's called the right to privacy cases. Those rights don't exist in the Constitution. They're simply read into the Constitution as an act of substantive due process emanating from these several other amendments, 4th, 15th, 9th, right, 1st, various ones, as if there was a sewing it together. And that's the lineup of cases. So conservatives, including this opinion Dobbs, when it says wrongly decided, the social conservatives have always said, and by the way, all the things I just read to you, all those rights are not rights that the moral majority liked. Those are not rights that conservative Americans liked. Those were rights that progressives liked, right? Feminists liked, right? So all of those rights were read in, and they were read in always with sort of an objection. So when you saw the confirmation hearings of the conservative Trump appointees, and they always were asked, they were being asked this question. No one asked it the way I've explained it to you, but that's really what they were saying, are you one of those people that thinks there's no such thing as a right to privacy and these rights are made up rights? Or do you actually believe they are rights that exist in the Constitution, even though they're unenumerated? And so when you heard Gorsuch and Kavanaugh all saying, I believe that Roe v. Wade is now settled law, That was a way to reassure the senators, I don't think that's bullshit. I think those rights are established. They've been on the books now for many decades, and I accept that that's settled law. So all that Roe v. Wade said was that a woman has a fundamental constitutional right. Again, conservatives go, where? Where did you find this? But Roe v. Wade simply said, women have the right to freedom of reproduction or reproductive freedom, liberty, that exists for the first trimester, while the child, the fetus, cannot live outside the womb, which is called viability.
Mm-hmm.
And after the first 26 weeks, the state now has a compelling interest to step in and protect the rights of an unborn child. That's all that Roe v. Wade said. Mm-hmm. 20 years later, almost 20 years later, Casey versus Planned Parenthood had said, well, states can restrict those rights, like do things to make it a little harder to have an abortion, like what such things like mandatory waiting periods. That doesn't mean you don't have a right to abortion. It simply says you can't have an immediate abortion. If you come in, you have to wait a several number of weeks, right? What's the point? We want you to think about it, right? Or mandatory sonograms. What? We want you to see the picture of your baby. We want you to see how hard it should be for you to kill that thing. So the states developed these, what would be called restriction to access rules. They were just making it a little harder. More recently, what was one called admitting privileges. You can't go to a clinic to have an abortion unless your doctor has the right, the admitting privilege to go to a hospital with you in case something goes wrong. It just so happens, guys, most doctors in clinics don't have those admitting privileges. They're not either licensed or not permitted. They don't have automatic right to run into an emergency room and say, I'm a doctor, get me a table. No, you don't have any privileges here. So Texas, Louisiana created those. So those are what's called restrictions on access. Casey versus Planned Parenthood, and then I'll stop that and hope this was helpful.
Absolutely.
Casey versus Planned Parenthood simply said, those things are okay, those restrictions, as long as they don't create an undue burden on women. So that became the undue burden test, right? That a state can get away with these little restrictions on access because it doesn't mean that you don't have a right to an abortion. It just slows it down a little, as long as they're not undue burden. And that's all that's Roe said. That's all that Casey said. And all we've seen until then is these cases that restricted access. Nobody until recently, a few weeks ago, and again, that opinion has not been released. So we have no idea what it looks like today. And we certainly don't know what it will look like at the end of June when they release it. But right now, it looks like they're literally doing something that was not imagined, which is to say, we're not just restricting access. By the way, the original Mississippi case was not about Roe v. Wade at all. Mm-hmm. It was simply to say, wait a minute, why is the trimester 24 to 26 weeks? Why can't it be 15 weeks or 16 weeks? That's all Mississippi said. Mm-hmm. With the level of science, originally, that's all they said. Can't viability exist in 16 weeks, 15 weeks? If the issue is viability, science is much better than it was in 1973. So the Mississippi original law simply reduced the time period after which it was banned. It was only at the oral argument that the Mississippi Attorney General said, the hell with that. Let's just go for broke. Forget we're against Roe v. Wade, period. Mm-hmm. Originally in their pleadings, they said, no, we have nothing against Roe v. Wade. We're just simply saying we want to move the goalpost from 23, 24 to 15, 16. That's all that happened. And that's all that Roe v. Wade said.
Okay.
So how is the Supreme Court now? What are, I know from my limited reading, and it's not, I don't think I'm a lawyer. All I know is I know a lot less about law than I thought I did. And what fascinated me is that lawyers don't look at things the same way. The legal system doesn't look at things the same way that a layman would. We look at the whole concept. In the legal field, you look at the elements and analyze each element, and they have to stand on their own. So what possibly is the Supreme Court looking at? What elements are they looking at that they're saying, hey, we may come up with a different result as based of looking at these elements? What are they either removing, or what do they feel was based falsely designed? I don't even know how to ask the question.
No, you're asking it well. First of all, I actually wrote a book about this very point. It's called The Myth of Moral Justice: Why the Legal System Fails to Do What's Right. And it really is about what you said, which is, how is it possible that people read in the paper what happened in the law, and then they're sitting at dinner and they look at each other and go, that doesn't make any sense to me at all. Like, well, I don't know. And why is it only if you get the secret handshakes of law school does it make sense? And I wrote about moral justice, this basic idea that legal justice should look like moral justice. It should be the same, that a person shouldn't be sitting at dinner and go, I don't even understand what the hell just happened. How has that happened? Right? That what the public perception of how the law works and how it should work should more be synthesized. It should be symmetrical. It have a coherence with the way the public understands it, instead of lawyers understanding it in a particular way that doesn't make sense to, you know, a reasonable person on the street. So yes, this happens all the time. What you just said is exactly what I think is among the many problems of the legal system, that people throw up their hands and go, there's no justice in America. They say that because some of it doesn't make sense. So what Justice Alito seems to be saying in a draft opinion, again, let's not give it more credence than it is. It was a draft opinion in February. It is now middle May. That means it's probably gone through another literally 50 drafts.
That's what I was going to
You have no idea. You have no idea. Each judge has 4 clerks. All of them take a shot at this thing. All the judges take a shot. Everyone, the majority opinion, which had 5 justices, you have no idea. Some of them said, if that is in there like that, I'm leaving the majority opinion. So then when people say the leaker had to be a progressive, probably, but it could have been a conservative. It could have been someone who said, I will not vote with the majority if it says that. So unless you get rid of that, I'm moving over to the other side. So it's possible that a conservative leaked it because he tried or she tried to lock in the 5. Lock them in so that everyone knows if you changed your vote, we know you changed it, because in February you wanted to overturn Roe v. Wade, and in June you didn't. So what the hell happened to you, right? So it could have been the other way, but it's probably more likely the leaker's progressive. I'm just saying there's another way of looking at it. So what Alito said was that Roe was egregiously, he used the word, and that's a tough word, which I'm sure is not going to be in the egregiously wrong. I have a feeling you won't see that in the final opinion, because that's very harshly said. And what he was really saying was the moral dimension of, and this is one of the reasons he said, do not misread this opinion as meaning that we are going to undo contraception. Remember, I gave you the other basket of right to privacy rights, right to marriage. Everyone is all up, interracial marriage, all of those things, gay sex. He's saying it has nothing to do with it. This affects only abortion and abortion only. He said that. He might be kidding, but that's what he said, right? He said it. And the reason he said none of those other right to privacies, right? Those rights that fall under the penumbras, right? Remember, we talked about that. None of them have the moral gravity of taking a life. He's right? If 2 gay people want to have sex, that's their business. If 2 people of the same sex want to get married, let them get married. But he's saying, let's be honest, among all of the rights that emanate from the right to privacy, none of them require the moral gravity of taking a life. By the way, this is what the pro-life community has been saying the whole time. How can you all be so callous and indifferent and casual about the taking of a life that is unborn but is a potential life? That, again, as you know, that's the heated rhetoric, right? One side believes that it's ungodly to do this. The other side says it's not a fetus is not a person, right? It's simply stop talking about a fetus like another human being. So that's all that really happened so far in this opinion. By the way, I've said this on many media networks over the last several weeks. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who everyone knows is sort of the darling of the progressive left, she had problems with Roe v. Wade. Not everyone wants to admit this because it's terrible for conservatives, but she spoke about it. She wrote about it. She thought that two things. It went too fast. It was too rushed in 1973. She said she said she basically predicted this would happen because she said this should not have been decided as a right to privacy. It should have been decided as a simple equal protection. And it should have been decided not on a right to an abortion, but a right to an abortion based on sexual violence or rape, meaning in situations like that, to just narrow the case. Don't make it broad. Start it slow. That's what Supreme Court cases like to do. Incremental change, small little ones. And she thought what would have been good is challenge that Texas law because it unfairly is not equal, doesn't provide equal protection to women who have been subject, as opposed to women having consensual sex versus women who were being raped. And so why should women be treated differently, right? On equal protection grounds, not to privacy grounds. It's simply equal protection. A woman who has consensual sex shouldn't be treated differently. A woman that the law essentially is there, she would say, to protect women who were sexually assaulted and it resulted in a pregnancy, an unwanted pregnancy. So he was sort of picking up, Alito picked up on that this case went too far, too fast, and invented a rule that doesn't exist in the Constitution.
So I'm going to go off book a little bit because, what I'm hearing from you versus what I hear, the rest of the world talking about is, you're stating a lot of facts and things like that seem to make sense. And what I'm hearing from other people, and we've had arguments, is more separation of church and state and what religious views are, and they're pulling in the Christian ethic versus, even what the Old Testament says. It's
not, look, there's no doubt there's a lot of people marching. Yeah. As most people are lovely, but they don't know anything. They know how to renovate a kitchen, everyone has their thing, but most people, they don't they don't know anything. So they're marching. It's good. But I'm saying, if you said to them, what are you marching for? They would say, the Supreme Court is banning abortion. Actually, it's not. It's not. All it said, this opinion, all it says, again, I'm not supporting the decision. So don't call me a racist. I know that I'm called a racist. I don't know how I could be called a racist.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with
people will be called a racist, Rona, for anything, for eating a tuna sandwich. It's a racist because the fish is white. So there's always a reason to be called a racist in our culture. But I'm simply saying all the court said was this: Roe is wrongly decided. There's no constitutional right to an abortion under federal law. It's not in the Constitution. This is a decision for legislators in states. The decision should be made by the people, not by people in robes, but by the people voting for their state legislators. He's saying, I'm providing a democratic solution to the problem. This is this should be voted on by the people, by your state legislators. If progressives hate this opinion, you know what they really should be doing instead of marching? Running for their state house and state senate. That's what you should do. Just don't be an imbecile.
You heard it here first.
You don't be an imbecile and just run around like an ignorant person. Yeah. Try not being ignorant for a second. Do some reading and actually know what the hell you're talking about. Know what you're talking about and simply say, you know what? Alito told us that this is for the people to decide, and it would be decided at the state level. And the problem is, we've learned with the Electoral College, Republicans control state houses. They've been doing this for a long time. They control state houses, even in blue states sometimes, right? And state senates. So all he's saying is it's up for the state, which means a few things. Blue states, for most of the case, will always have abortion rights and may even expand it, right? I don't know. I only think there'll be a handful of cases that will ban it outright. Only a few, I would say, 6, 7, that's my guess. States that will vote no, under no circumstances, as you would say, as you said before, real Christian rights stuff, right? No way, can't happen no matter what happens to you. You can't have an abortion. And most states, other states will create the restrictions. There's an abortion, but it's not 24 weeks, it's 16. There are admitting privileges. There's all the sonograms. They'll come up with all kinds of other restrictions to make it harder, right? And that Casey now would be overruled too. So there's no undue burden test anymore. But it's not like when someone's walking around saying, this is banning abortions. No, it's not doing what happened in the 1950s, where every state said it wasn't legal. It's basically saying, let the people decide through the democratic process. That's what it says. So it really isn't about the religious right. That's not to say the counter protesters aren't hardcore evangelicals. They are. The ones that are pro-life, they are, right? And I don't know what Hasidic Jews think, right? I suspect that religious Hindus feel the same way. It's not just Christians. I don't know. I don't know enough about it.
Right.
I don't know what hardcore Buddhists think. I don't know.
Right.
But it may be that it is a religious issue for regular people, most people on the street. They base this decision on their religion. I don't know. But that is not what the Supreme Court said.
Right.
The Supreme Court did not do this for Christian reasons.
Right. So you had mentioned something, and this is getting down to those elements again. So if they're going to say that if Ruth was saying that, it should be different for somebody who's raped or sexually assaulted, and that's a different case than somebody who has consensual sex. Just because they have consensual sex, though, doesn't mean they have consent to being a baby factory. So now, because we've changed,
well, that's not,
the
just to
role
be
of
clear,
sex.
that's not what she said. I'm sorry. I didn't want to.
No. I know that's not what
She
you
was just
said.
simply saying, challenge the law on the part that prevents a woman who's been sexually assaulted from having an abortion. Just go right there, very narrow. Say that that person has not received equal protection as opposed to other women, because they're being forced to have a child that was not consensual. Right, that they were forced, they were attacked in the bushes. Someone dragged them into the woods and raped them. And they're not being treated with the same freedom as a woman who had consensual sex. So that's the way she would have challenged the Texas law for Roe v. Wade. She would not have said there's a right to privacy. She would have said women are being denied a constitutional right. Guess what? That's in the Constitution. It's enumerated. It's in the 14th Amendment. It's called equal protection. And that undercuts the people that are saying, show me in the Constitution where it says it. Well, Ruth Bader Ginsburg says, well, it's in the 5th Amendment. It's in the 14th Amendment. It says equal protection under the law. That's what she was trying to do, to avoid people saying, show me where it says abortion.
Okay. So since we're talking about this, I'll grab the next one.
Go ahead.
So even though the law is supposed to look at things differently, it seems that personal perspectives do play a predominant role in their decision making. I mean, Anthony Alito Jr. was nominated by George Bush. He is Catholic, and the church is solidly against abortion, whereas Joan Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Bader, was nominated by Bill Clinton. And she, not only being the first Jewish woman, she was only the second woman to serve on the Supreme Court. And if I'm correct from my colleague here, the Torah says a child's life begins with the first breath. Therefore, it seems Alito is finally, it seems like he's deeply affected by church doctrine and his focus on it, versus Ruth, who doesn't have that conflict.
Well, Ruth Bader, no one ever can, by the way, they were best friends, which is interesting anecdote. They didn't agree on anything on the court, but they were opera lovers. They had dinners together with their spouses. It's actually a fascinating buddy movie. They literally didn't agree. They didn't agree on anything on the court, but they were literally the foursome with their spouses were inseparable. They hung out together every weekend. Anyway, she was not a religious Jew. He was a religious Catholic. That's number one. There are no religious litmus tests. If you ask during the confirmation hearings, does your religion influence your rulings? All of the justices would say, the only thing that influences my rulings is my understanding of the Constitution. right? That I do not bring a Bible into my deliberations. You know, I check my religion at the door. Now, again, civilians are going to go, oh, really? Seriously?
Exactly.
Yeah, seriously? I know. But, you know, you can only take them at their word, right? They're saying, you know, Amy Coney Barrett went to Notre Dame, and then she went to Notre Dame Law School.
Mhm.
And now she's, and then before she became a federal judge, she was a professor at Notre Dame,
Oh.
right? Right? I mean, it tells you a lot. She also
Right,
has
it
like
does.
7 or 8 kids,
Right.
right? You know, and clearly never believed in abortion, and personally is opposed to abortion, and said that. But at her hearings, she wanted it to be known that no, you know, don't read Notre Dame too heavily into this, because just because I spent 7 years as a student and now 10 or 12 years as a professor means that I'm basing my legal decision making in my interpretation of the Constitution on Catholic doctrine.
Mhm.
Again, I understand there was a very famous case of Virginia versus Black, which was one of the cases that dealt with cross burning, which to me is insane. Like, I've written a book about the First Amendment. I think it's insane in our country. It wouldn't be true we're going a little off road here. It's not true in Western societies, in Western Europe, also democracies, liberal democracies. Nazis don't have the right to get a permit to march in Austria, France, Germany. If they do it, they go march straight to jail. In the United States, you absolutely get a right to march in a town of Holocaust survivors. To me, that's insane, right? That's permissible. I wrote a book about this, and my last book is about this, Saving Free Speech from Itself. But it is the law. Similarly, in a nation that had slavery and Jim Crow, it's insane that the Klan could burn a cross on an African-American's lawn, and that is a free speech right. It's insane. To me, it's an act of insanity. It doesn't make us a better country. It makes us a stupid country. But I'm in the minority. People are absolutely think I'm wrong. Okay. So in Virginia versus Black, it was a case that was testing a cross burning case. So at the time, it was a number of years ago now, Clarence Thomas, during the pandemic, because they changed the way oral arguments are being conducted, all the justices asked their questions in order of seniority. It used to be a rumble where there was no seniority. The lawyer gets up there and then they just get pummeled by the justices, and the justices interrupt each other. That's the way it used to be. So during all those, like the first 20 years that Thomas was on the Supreme Court, he never asked one question, not one. It was like funny. It was a known thing. He sat there very quietly and never asked a question. Only now is he required basically to ask questions. But after 20 years of being on the court, and one of these the oral argument for Virginia versus Black, he steps, the first thing he says is, my granddaddy was a sharecropper and had to deal with the Klan. And everyone went, what? He's talking? Since when does Clarence Thomas talk? And a lot of people were like opposed to what he said, because they said, wait a minute, you're a judge that interprets the Constitution. It's not your job to tell us about your grandfather being a Black sharecropper that had to deal with the Klan. I wrote, that was one of the great moments in Supreme Court history. I thought that was awesome. I thought that he stepped out of a robe into the shoes of a Black man and he spoke like a Black man. And I thought that was an amazing moment. And people were very critical of him. By the way, it was so weird that even the Supreme Court justices were so thrown by it that they started asking sympathetic questions about the idea of upholding the law in Virginia to ban cross burnings, because they felt bad. But normally they would have been pro cross burnings. Yay, cross burnings, the way to go. But because Thomas spoke like a Black man and talked about his granddaddy, right, he humanized the issue, right? So what I'm saying is that it would be better, I guess, if the Catholics on the court humanized the issue and said, look, you know, I can't help, I'm who I am. I'm interpreting the Constitution, but I'm also influenced by the fact that I'm against them. But that's just not something we do. It literally happened one time in Virginia versus Black, and it happened with cross burnings, but generally speaking, the justices are very adamant. Our personal lives are not brought into our deliberations.
Okay. So Thane, I'm being that I'm a woman and this is a business podcast, I'm curious about this. Ruth Bader Ginsburg had in her points about this whole Roe versus Wade thing, thinks that thought that abortion restrictions affected low-income women the most, and now with the pandemic affects all women, working from home. They have kids if they don't want them because of it's going to affect their career, et cetera, et cetera. How do you see this if and when it's overturned, whatever it turns out to be? How do you see this being affected or affecting women in business overall? Because we are fighting still for equal pay and representation and just being taken seriously overall.
Well, there's a few things. First of all, some states, given what I said before about it's being turned over to the states, will become, abortion sanctuaries, right? So from a business perspective, will they be able to handle, for people that can't afford to fly into my state and to set up an appointment? You can imagine how this is going to be, right? Are abortion doctors going to advertise in states that don't provide for abortion and say, set up an appointment with us, right? Come to this clinic here. Will some states make it, will some states that are opposed to abortion try to criminalize attempts to leave the state, right? I don't see how they can do that. There's the Commerce Clause, this freedom of movement. But, the Texas fetal heartbeat law, which has not before the Supreme Court, probably would have gotten to the Supreme Court eventually. Now there's no reason to, if they overturned Roe v. Wade, was basically saying, forget 16 weeks, let's just go to 8 weeks. Or I forgot whether it's 6 weeks or 8 weeks, whatever it is, saying the minute you can hear a heartbeat, there's a living person. And so at that point, and most people don't even know they're pregnant by 8 weeks, right? So that's what the Texas, but the difference, what Texas did is it didn't criminalize it. It created it a civil penalty so that it wasn't like you sued the governor of Texas. What you did was it deputized regular Texans to rat out anyone that helped someone get an abortion after 8 weeks, including Uber drivers. So it basically it incentivized people to say, I could get a $10,000 fee if I rat out someone who even assisted someone getting. So it wasn't like they were even going after the abortion providers. They're providing for a civil penalty, right? And that by doing so, this is where the court was very confused, because normally, you remember, the Constitution only applies against states preventing you from doing something, right? People keep forgetting, like with the First Amendment, with free speech, they say to their neighbor, don't tell me to shut up. I have a free speech right. Actually, you don't. You don't have a free speech right with your neighbor. Your neighbor can say anything he wants, and the government in the First Amendment, it says the government shall not abridge free speech. It doesn't say that your neighbor who tells you to shut up can't tell you to shut up. Your neighbor can tell you to shut up, and you don't have a free speech right. So again, similarly, what Texas did was take the government out of the picture and make it private individuals suing each other under that abortion law. It was actually kind of brilliant, right? To say, we're going to make it really hard. It's not even a constitutional question at all, because the government isn't doing it. It's the private individuals. So it's possible that other states will do things like that, right? To incentivize people, create laws to make it harder to leave the state or to help someone leave the state in order to get an abortion. If you knew that someone was leaving Mississippi to go to New Jersey to get an abortion, you might be held liable in civil court for X, right? I don't know.
So it's
that could happen.
Kind of Nazi-ish.
That could happen.
Yeah.
Rat out your neighbor.
It is scary. I think Missouri has introduced proposed a new law right in those lines, where you'll rat out. It basically turns everybody into a spy.
Yeah, well,
unfortunately,
it turns everyone into a private attorney general.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look like it's state action, which means that it doesn't present a constitutional problem, or doesn't apparently, right? It doesn't on its face present a constitutional problem, because it's individuals. It's not the government restricting you. It's individuals taking advantage of a law that incentivizes them to rat you out. So those are possibilities that some states, from the business perspective, this could be like, Vegas and getting a divorce.
Yeah.
Like the same idea that some cities will say to the world, we are a total abortion city. We got clinics on every block. We got coffee shops. Just come here and have an abortion.
We're the Starbucks of abortions.
Yeah, it's really right. It's kind of creepy to say it that way, but we don't know, if, again, most people marching don't realize that this opinion doesn't criminalize abortion.
Mm-hmm.
It simply says the Constitution doesn't guarantee a right to an abortion,
Right.
which means that there still will be abortion providers. The question is, what will that business look like?
Yeah.
The business of abortions, I just don't know. I know a guy in Miami who does hair transplants. He invented like a special way of doing it. And he publicized mostly in Latin America because he's in Miami, and it's a cash business. He's an MD, but people were flying in it with, suitcases of cash. And it always seemed weird to me. Wait, you mean your patients don't actually even speak English? No, they fly in, they stay in a nice hotel, they bring over the cash, I give them hair, they stay a few more days to make sure they're okay, and I send them back to wherever they are. I don't know if that's fine. If abortion is going to look like that.
Yeah.
The question that you started off with, well, what about women that can't fly off and stay in hotels and do stuff like that? Those that now present other equal protection problems, like I said before, like women who are poor will be deprived of a right that other women have because they can't avail themselves of the right because they're too poor to fly and stay in a hotel.
So basically, from a business standpoint, opportunities are going to close and opportunities are going to open up.
Yeah.
So, there's been this huge diversity movement, this awareness, the concept of whether it was intentional or non-intentional, bullying people regarding their sex, regarding their color, regarding their background, all that supposedly businesses have gotten, oh yeah, we're now a safe environment for you to hang out. And then we're going to land, if they pull away the rights for women, I mean, it almost discriminates against women again, because once again, they're left with having the burden of this problem. If you get pregnant because you got drunk and
one night stands,
stuff like that. I mean, as a businesswoman, the organization can turn on you now.
Well, Amy Coney Barrett, remember Miss Notre Dame, right? So when she was on her confirmation hearings, she at one point said, she wasn't saying she was opposed to Roe v. Wade, but she said, today there are more options. Women in the 1960s and 70s who had children would never be employable. And today there's all kinds of maternity leave, there's home health care, there's home child care. Some of this is being provided by the government. She was trying to make an argument that, there is a dearth of adoption opportunities for Caucasian children, as an example, or any children, for example. So she's saying, well, let's try to remember what the world looked like for women in the 1950s and 60s, and the world is different. So she was making an argument, yeah, you were drunk and you got pregnant, and that was your mistake, but you can't take the life of someone else, and you don't have to keep the baby. The baby can go to someone else who will really want to be a mother, and you'll go back to your job. And the stigma doesn't exist in the same way as it existed in the 1960s and 1970s. Social conservatives would also say to you, Jeffrey, they would say, yeah, but you keep talking about the rights of women and you're not talking about the rights of the unborn. Why do you keep talking about that? Right? They're listening to, and that's what they're thinking. They're thinking he's very casual about the horrible restrictions of rights of women, but he never seems to mention the rights of the unborn. It's clear that that's not something that you're focused on. in the way that they're not focused on a girl that got drunk at a party. They're like going, that has nothing to do with me. That was a decision she made, it was a mistake, but that mistake is going to have to play itself out for 9 months until that baby is born. And then there are decisions. Remember, that was the whole point. Remember I said the mandatory sonograms, right? It was to put it in your face, like, don't pretend this is a nothing, a peanut, that you get rid of a little peanut. That's not life. We say it's life. By the way, remember I said before about, that abortions were legal, but restrictions were not. And I gave you a list of things like mandatory. Right. One of the other ones was, can people who are religious Christians, right, who feel very strongly on abortion, can they stand outside of the abortion clinics with literature or posters and shove it in your face if you're a 19-year-old girl or 17-year-old girl who's trying to just go inside to Planned Parenthood and have an abortion? Can they attack you with literature? Right. And so that was another example of what would be, was there a limit? You could be 100 feet away. Could you go 5 feet in front of them and show them a picture? So that was another example of restrictions. They're the rights of people to inform you versus are they there to intimidate you, right, and scare you, or are they there to just inform you? So, again, that's why this is so explosive, because two sides see a right that to them is fundamental. One says it's the fundamental right of the body of the woman. The other says it's the fundamental right of an unborn child.
And we always say, and it's true. People listen to respond. They don't listen to listen, and that's a big thing. There's no connection. One side is not talking about what the.
By the way, Jeffrey, you thought if you had someone instead of me, and you had a right to life advocate for today, you could have done that. You could have said, "Who gives a shit about the law? I want to talk about what people are feeling. I want to understand, try to, you said, look, I'm open-minded. I'm not some lunatic that you says the word racist every 30 seconds. My name is Jeffrey. I'm an open-minded person. This is my friend, Rona. I want to tell me, maybe you can convince me, maybe what would that have been like for you? I don't know. I've never had that conversation.
Well, and we actually did have some people,
and they turned down that they didn't even want to speak on their.
I mean, I happen to be pro-choice, but I would be very happy to listen to someone talk to me for an hour about what they thought. And I'm thrilled to hear that Biz-Souls is actually open-minded enough to offer that up, and hopefully you would have protected that person if the others ganged up on
Absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Sure. Everyone's entitled. We both have friends on both sides of the aisle. We always listen, and you can always agree to disagree. Even with everything.
I'm just laughing because sometimes we listen, and sometimes
we get
the emotions click in, and we don't listen so good, or at least I don't.
We are, and it's both of us. Yes, we are human, and then have to take a step back and say, you know what, every human deserves to be listened to, because everyone has a right. And I think we both lost friends even during the pandemic, of people who were, QAnon believers and things like that you just, whether, we can agree to disagree. And after a while, if you get harped on enough, you're like, bye-bye, right. I don't want to deal with it.
Well, Thane, you brought up an interesting point, and you may have, I was thinking about what you were saying. Yes, I am.
Thank you for getting him to start thinking.
I am coming across.
Looks like a thinker to me.
I'm sitting. My focus is on the woman, and part of that is just because we don't do the stuff we're supposed to. That is why all the stats show that crime rates go up when abortion's restricted. 18 years down the road. I mean, they've tracked it statistically. There was there are a couple of studies we looked at, and I don't want to quote the wrong one, so I won't even put a name on it. They actually studied that there is a direct link between the inability to have an abortion and increases in crime, because we don't take care of the baby. And we don't provide for the baby afterwards. If they live in a bad environment.
People are so adamant and so opinionated about the right to life and stuff. And then it's like, once you're born, That's it. That's why homelessness is
So then
bad,
my
all kinds of
focus is on that. Anyway, that's more of a
Yeah, I just want you to be careful with that. That I'm telling you right now, that's racist. In our culture, what you just said is racist.
What is?
What everything you just
Oh, really?
flat out racist. There's no question. Be very
Why?
careful. Well,
But
because
I
what
don't
you're
see that
saying
as-
is crime is up. People associate crime with African Americans. Women who can't get abortions will eventually give birth to potential criminals. And everyone now knows that the majority of abortions, the statistics we're starting to hear, is disproportionately affecting African American women who don't have access
And
to abortion. So even though that isn't what you said,
Right.
in this culture,
Right.
believe me, you won't hear that argument.
Well,
It should be an argument because it's a good argument. If everybody's
it's based on facts.
I know, but nobody cares about that.
No.
The
Wait a
people-
second.
they
Wait.
care about disparate impact. If it disparately impacts a race, it can only be one thing: racism.
Well,
And in this case, it would disparately impact a race.
Okay.
Here's the thing, though. This is what's running through my head, and I really appreciate that. Okay, New York, they just had another a gunman just killed 11 people. White dude,
Yeah.
a young kid, guaranteed unloved by his parents, or his parents had other issues on him. I'm guaranteed to.
I
It's
wouldn't say
lower
guaranteed
income.
because you just don't know. Okay.
So for me, it doesn't come up as.
And also, we know he was a racist.
He absolutely was.
He had
racist.
racist postings on social media.
Right.
Yeah.
But
and
that idea, if that's interesting to you, it's always been interesting to me, Jeffrey. The John Irving novel, the Cider House Rules, is about that idea. It was made into a movie, but the movie doesn't really cover this idea. In the novel, the point that you're making is why is Dr. Larch an abortion doctor? Because to him, he also runs an orphanage, and he understands the cruelty of putting people into the world who are unloved and are being told, we don't love you, we don't have a home for you. And that ultimately leads to other social pathologies, including the heartbreak for the person, the child, who will grow up unloved. Why would you want to do that? So that book was, in its day, remember that was in the Roe v. Wade was solid. Nobody worried about that. But it was really read as another justification for abortions. It was read as a justification. Here's another thought. Why put people into the world that are going to be unloved? And what will result from that kind of unlove, which is Jeffrey's point.
Right. Absolutely.
So anyway, by the way, in terms of the racist thing, I did a program for a very mixed college group. I teach as lecture at different schools. So I was reading, it was predominantly of color, and I was coming in as an old white dude. It was predominantly of color. So I did,
and rightly so.
I did a ton of research. Like,
you are definitely that.
How am I going to be perceived here? And it was great. This gal, and again, I can't remember her name right now because I was
we don't want to say names anyway.
No, she had said she's a Black author. She's a professor at some university. She said there are worse things than being called a racist. You could actually be on the other end of the racism. And that was just a great question.
That's a good point.
It was just a great point. It was like, okay, that's great. So and that's what discussion is about, us getting over these difficult periods with this. So my question to you is, if I can.
Sure.
We've there's a little preamble on this. So we have a great many freedoms intended from the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and they're the focus of the media. Gun ownership, one of which is it, and they use every time somebody shoots somebody, they use gun ownership. Drug legalization, healthcare issues, who's going to pay for what, and privacy rights.
And now, abortion is a partial healthcare issue.
Yes. Now I've read that there are 1.33 million lawyers in the United States, and many of them are struggling to make a living. The ambulance chasers, and a lot of them become ambulance chasers just to make a living and pay for all their schooling. So the impact of lawsuits has driven up the cost for business and individuals. Medical and insurance fees have skyrocketed as a result. And in response, medical and insurance companies are making it harder for small business owners to get ahead. So here's the buried question. Would you recommend somebody going into law, and how can they contribute to a better world for all of us?
Well, we're unusual as a country. We organize our lives around law. That's not true, say, of the Canadians. They don't. We really do organize. That's number one. Number two, we don't live in an apologetic culture. Where we live in a defensive culture, where people will almost do anything other than say, I'm sorry. And there have been studies about, like 30% of all personal injury lawsuits would disappear if doctors would just say they're sorry, and make some offer of some kind of restitution. Instead, we've created, industries based on suing, right? You watch commercials. Have you been near any, have you ever taken this product? Did you ever eat this? Did you ever, right? So we knew these product liability cases. Most nations don't have that. This is a very litigious culture where we resolve our disputes, thankfully not by the Hatfields and McCoys, but that we're encouraged to have these disputes. People don't apologize. They're very defensive, and they're not willing to make, an offer of any kind. But again, there are incredible statistics about personal injury lawsuits disappearing if doctors will simply, but the problem is the insurance malpractice case contracts, medical malpractice contracts are written such that if the doctor talks to you after something goes wrong, you're on your own. He's on his own, or she's on his own. In other words, if she says the wrong thing, the contract says stay away and don't say a word. So the very person that's supposed to show up to your room and hold your hand and go, this is so not what I was planning. I am mortified that this happened. Under his or her malpractice contract is forbidden from doing so. Other words, by the way, if you look at the fine print for Geico and State Farm, same thing with car accidents. You're supposed to trade your insurance card and run to your car and act mad. Go to the other side and look pissed off. That's your job. You're not allowed to go, shit, I can't believe that I made that turn. God, I'm really sorry. Geico's going, you're on your own. If you're going to start talking like that, you're on your own. You got to act indignant. So, that does explain why we have far too many lawyers in our culture. Look, I've always been, Rona knows I was a Wall Street lawyer, and then I wrote novels, before I even became a law professor. Which I own. Right. So thank you. You're the one.
Yes.
I knew there was someone.
You actually printed them in your kitchen.
Yes, I still am by hand. So, I've been one of those people that thought law school is actually a really good education. I'm just not so sure practicing law is a good experience.
Yeah.
But law school itself, there's a lot to be said for it. Just like, a lot of people go to college and major in English and don't teach English. So I don't particularly think of law school only as a finishing school, as a trade school. But, I do think that this is a country that does appear to always need more lawyers, and I would say this, just like that's true of doctors in the Appalachians, they need more lawyers.
Sure.
Everyone wants to call themselves a Century City lawyer or a downtown LA lawyer or a Wall Street lawyer. Very few people go to law school and go, I want to go to underserved communities. I want to be a righteous Atticus Finch crusader. We don't have enough people that say that.
Well, it's because I think in the second year, maybe that there's an actual course on how lawyers and egos need to mesh. No, everybody wants a nice business card. Right.
It's the reason why doctors no longer want to be general practitioners. They all want to be surgeons. Right. They want to be like fighter pilots. That's been a problem in our medical system. That no one ever really wanted to be the guy with the medical bag that went from house to house and everybody know his name and they called him, Jeff, and Jeff got invited to all the bar mitzvahs.
Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Jeff got invited to all the weddings and everyone knew him. Everyone knew him. And no, guess what? No one ever sued Jeff.
Yeah.
I wrote about this.
because you could trust him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You can always
that's
trust.
another thing.
You can always trust Jeff.
Yeah, you know, but just because we know that he didn't do it that way, he didn't do it to hurt me.
Right.
You know, no one ever sued that guy. So look, all of these ways of professionalization has separated us from each other and created these reasons why it's easy to be antagonistic and to
Well,
be
yeah,
with
it's,
people.
everyone's always suing everyone else
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the least,
Or
for evidently
threatening.
being a racist too.
Yeah.
All right,
Yes.
Okay, we're running out of
Yeah,
time.
we
We're
have-
gonna
we have
have.
one
We
more
only have one
question.
more question before
Can I
that,
ask it?
though. No, my point is, be a Jeff, not a Karen.
That's right. Be a Jeff. Very nice. Very nice.
I think that should be the new motto for
There you
Biz-Souls.
go. Be a Jeff, not a Karen. Very good. That's really funny. All right. So I have one more question being, bringing it back to business. And because in business, in politics, any of them, leadership is absolutely crucial. And unfortunately, in both arenas, their egos get in the way. And there's something called hero leadership where they make decisions without, democratically asking people. They just figure if this is what I believe, this is what everyone else is, going to have to believe. And that obviously creates unhealthy environments and
Because it
cultures.
generally comes out of self-interest.
Of
They're
course it
making
does.
decisions out
Yeah.
of self-interest.
And so, Thane, we'd actually talked a little bit about this before we started. Both the DNC and the RNC have gotten a little bit lost in that hero leadership. So
They're
being said,
promoting polarism.
yes, that's a great
They're
point. Yes.
trying to get us to fight.
Yeah. So could they be tried under the RICO Act?
Oh, that's a great question.
Well, remember, the RICO statute was created for the mafia,
Mhm.
which isn't to say that there aren't other kinds of mafia, but it was really about how do we get to a criminal enterprise that functions in such a way of hierarchy that not one person is making decisions,
Mhm.
right? Remember from Godfather 2, there's that, you guys know the movie, there's that really great scene in this Senate investigation of the Corleone family where one of the henchmen says, no, I never talked to Michael Corleone, right? And he goes,
They're
he said,
buffers.
Yeah.
buffers, right? Good. I forgot the word. Yeah, there's a lot of buffers. And
Buffers.
then everyone,
A lot of buffers.
buffers, and then everyone laughs in there. Well, the RICO statutes was created because of that scene. They
Oh,
were
really?
well, not
That's
really,
funny.
but yes, because the idea being, well, if nothing is on paper, right, and everything is being whispered, and everyone's not being recorded, and everyone claims that he works for someone else who works for someone else who works for someone else, and no one knows who the direct order came from. If you have a criminal enterprise that crosses state lines, and as long as you're in the enterprise, we'll hold you responsible as part of a criminal conspiracy. You're in it, Michael Corleone, whether you talk to that Rocco guy or not, you're in it because you're part of that family,
Mhm.
right? That's the point. So so then the question is, okay, well, how widespread is the DNC? They're spread all over the country, right? They're in every single state. They have, right? So you could argue, okay, but the question is, are they engaged in criminal act? Are they engaged in fraud? Are they engaged in criminal activity that triggers RICO? What triggers RICO maybe is the idea that it's a gang, it's a widespread gang, and that you could put together a conspiracy. By the way, Donald Trump is suing the RNC now under RICO. So you're way ahead of the pitch there, both of you. He's suing Hillary Clinton's campaign managers, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was, I think, the head of the DNC. He's suing all of those for the Christopher Steele dossier, which ultimately led to the Mueller investigation. He's saying there was a criminal enterprise to undermine my campaign. Now, again, I don't know if it's a criminal enterprise. I don't know if they're engaged in
Well,
criminal
he's not,
behavior.
he's not involved in sensationalism at all. So
Right,
that would
right,
be
right.
really
Never.
surprising.
But look, the larger point you're talking about is the polarization. Look, our country was built on this concept of competition.
Mhm.
The right to, the John Locke, one of the leading writers on natural law, which is really how the Constitution and the Bill of Rights were set up under the rules of the Enlightenment from the 18th century. We were all reading the same books of the enlightened philosophers. John Locke said, individual rights to life, liberty, and property, right? That's what, and Thomas Jefferson changed it for the Declaration of Independence to right, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What the hell is that? Right? Why didn't you just leave it the way they had it in England? Why did you get something really fancy? Well, let me tell you, pursuit of happiness has been driving us insane as a nation because we don't know what it means. It's a very aggressive term, not property.
And nebulous.
Yeah,
it's
and it
so
says
nebulous.
Pursue is aggressive. I can pursue whatever makes me happy. I have a liberty to go do that. And if I have to knock you down to pursue that happiness, I'm going to do it. And I've written about this. This is a very American idea. We're a very competitive society. Jefferson didn't help when he wrote right up there, right up front, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Never told us what that meant. And it leaves it up to the individual to decide for him or herself to define his or her happiness. And it doesn't say pursuit of happiness subject to mutual respect of your neighbor. It doesn't say subject for you not behaving like a dick. It doesn't say, it doesn't say that. It just says pursuit of happiness.
And it should in those exact words, don't you think? I think it would be awesome.
Yeah, I would have loved that. It's an interesting sentence.
Well, to Mr. Jefferson's defense, though, it's kept the conversation going. I mean, you're never going to be able to. It's an argument that'll never.
It makes me happy to bitch slap you because you don't agree with me. So there you go.
Well, remember that people also don't realize is the Declaration of Independence is just an aspirational document. It has no legal authority. It's a statement. It's a proclamation. It's a declaration. I declare. It's not the Constitution. You can't point to the Declaration of Independence and say, I have rights under the Declaration. You don't. It's just a proclamation that set up the new country. We are proclaiming to be a new country. We are withdrawing from the king. We are now, I guess, at war with the king. Here's our reasons for why we're leaving. It's just a declaration, but it's still very important because it says, how did we start? We started with those words, and it says something about the country. I think it's very revealing, even though it's not legal in nature. You can't point to it. I have a right to the pursuit of happiness. No, not really. But it does say that our founding fathers thought that was important enough to say, this is why we're leaving the British crown.
Yeah. You make me miserable. So
yes,
we're
exactly.
looking to turn it the other way. You're annoying. Go away.
Thane, this has been fantastic. I
Good,
know we're out of time. You've got to go.
Yeah. I so appreciate
phenomenal.
it. Yeah, you did me a great favor, and if there's anything I can ever do for you, within reason.
We're friends. If you need me, I'll be back. So
That's what I was just going to ask.
I want Biz-Souls to succeed. So
me too. Tell all your friends.
I'll help you get guests.
That'd be great.
That'd be fantastic. Yeah. Thank you so much, Thane.
All right.
Bye, guys. Stay healthy.
Thank you.
See ya.
Love you, Rona. Bye.
Love
bye,
you
Jeff.
too.
You've been listening to the Biz-Souls podcast with your hosts, Rona Lewis and Jeffrey Hansler. Did you have fun? Subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. Talk to you next week.